Hi, and thanks for tuning in to another Abbeville Press podcast. Today, we share with you clips from 21st Century Radio's interview with Paul Grushkin, author of one of Abbeville's best-selling titles, The Art of Rock. Hosts Dr. Bob Hieronymus and Paul Grushkin were both part of the rock art movement that took the world by storm, and here they share their knowledge and experience in rock and roll culture. Let's listen in as Dr. Bob introduces Paul.
Well, back in the late 60s, rock and roll became a major part of my life. It wasn't just the music, it was the artwork that got me involved with Jimi Hendrix, Frank Zappa, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, Woodstock, and a scores of other projects and murals and album covers and posters and scenes and a series, actually, and not just scenes of art cars. Well, our first 1.5 hours is going to be about extraordinary books by Paul Grushkin, The Art of Rock Posters from Presley to Punk. Published in 1987 by our friends at Abbeville Press. Thank you, Abbeville Press. Paul Grushkin is the author of The Art of Rock, the standard work in the field of rock posters and its best-selling follow-up, Art of Modern Rock. He is the author of several other books in the field of rock history and memorabilia, including Grateful Dead, The Official Book of the Deadheads, and Treasures from the Hard Rock Cafe. A former archivist for promoter Bill Graham, he has more than 2 decades' experience at the forefront of rock merchandising, having mounted campaigns for top acts and created his own Phantom clothing line. Welcome to 21st Century Radio. Are you there, Paul?
Dr. Bob!
Well, you have done some extraordinary work, Paul. I am talking to a legend, and he certainly wouldn't think of himself as one, but we really are. The Art of Rock posters from Presley to Punk, 1,500 images reproduced in their original blazing colors with the meticulous care Abbeville lavishes on its other fine books. This is the definitive, all-inclusive rock poster collection, but it's even more than that. With all styles, periods, and regions amply represented, The Art of Rock is nothing less than a visual history of rock and roll, etc., 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 and it's all true!
Thanks, Dr. Bob, for those gracious introductions. Now, let's tune into Paul as he describes the history and novelty of rock posters and his book.
Well, these posters are extraordinary, obviously, but what were the major venues that these posters were created for?
Well, remember that before I came on the scene, and I'm not ascribing all the success of the rock and roll poster to me, but I will say this. I'm very fortunate in my life that each time I've touched a book, made a book, it's something that didn't exist in space and time before that. In other words, the rock poster scene in San Francisco, beginning in 1965, went light years in imagination and design beyond the boxing-style posters that go back into American history into the 1800s, early 1800s at that. Mm-hmm. So you had poster printers like Hat Show Print out of Nashville, Globe Poster out of Baltimore. You had Tillman Press out of Oakland, but they were doing things in the old boxing style. James Brown! And that's the way the posters looked and they felt. Now, oddly enough, those wonderful posters of the 1950s and early 60s are some of the rarest rock posters in existence today because nobody bothered to save them. They weren't like the psychedelic poster that leaped out at you and went, come here, take me, put me on your wall. Instead, the boxing-style poster, although it contained the names Otis Redding, James Brown, The Temptations, The Four Tops, and groups that we revere now. Any fan of Motown music or of black music coming up through the 1950s that basically set the stage for rock and roll, we have a tremendous nostalgic feel for. But the San Francisco psychedelic rock poster was such an enormous breakthrough. Art of Rock came out in 87. And prior to Art of Rock, there was no comprehensive book about rock posters. And I was in the fortunate position in the Art of Rock to start with the boxing-style posters of the 50s and early 60s, transition into psychedelic, and that became then in the 1970s, corporate rock. And then, of course, the answer to that is punk rock. So you had quite a number of generations expressed in one book, 500 pages, oversized art book, 2,000 color plates, and, it makes a hell of a doorstop, if nothing else.
Paul goes on to discuss the nature of rock poster collecting, which of course made rock posters a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, rock poster art has really become an idiom in itself. It becomes a collectible and also a decorative item. Mm-hmm. But remember that in the early days, the pure days, when these posters were being issued on a weekly basis on behalf of the Family Dog and Bill Graham's operation, we decorated with those posters. We scotch-taped them to our walls. We pinned them up.
Yeah, we pinned them up all right.
So I might have had, $100,000 worth of posters over the course of time.
Oh, I'm sure you
hanging on my walls. But I never saw it that way, Bob.
Yeah,
I never realized it because you're not supposed to know. You're not supposed to look at this thing and go, well, if I tuck it away and I don't look at it for like 50 years, it'll be worth $15,000.
I know, but people...
it's just too much fun, man, to put them on your wall.
Not only was Paul immersed in the rock poster scene, he also had a special connection to publishing, which, as he will describe, is how the art of rock came to be.
My family's been prominent within book publishing. My father, Philip, who's gone now, was the art director and senior vice president for Harry and Abrams Art Books, and that begat Abbeville later on.
Well,
so I, grew up in an environment where it was very clear that if you put your mind to it, you could create just about anything in a book form. And so, having fallen in love with the Grateful Dead by 1970, 71, it was pretty clear that if I was going to do my first book, it was going to be about the Dead.
Well, this is a super quality production. It's something's going to last forever and ever and ever because of the way it is bound, the quality of the paper. I do not understand how they could have produced it for the kind of money that it cost. I really don't understand that.
This book is now part of history.
Yeah.
It will, I may pass away someday, and that book will outlive me into untold generations, and I'm very respectful of what that means. But here's the deal, Bob. I've had this opportunity to create books where there were no books. There was no Grateful Dead Book of the Deadheads before I tackled it. There was no Art of Rock. There was no coffee table book for the Hard Rock Cafe. I feel really honored. I feel really respectful. I'm very humbled by these opportunities to, set the stage, to tell the story right, to include as much material as I can get my hands on and interpret it and organize it for rock and rollers.
We hope you enjoyed these tidbits about rock and roll history from Paul Grushkin. We'd like to give a special thanks to 21st Century Radio and Dr. Bob for sharing this special interview with us. Be sure to check out The Art of Rock on our website. Thanks for joining us.